The narrative didn't even get off the ground before it completely collapsed into the dirt, bear-eating itself, where no one would ever hear from it again. Arlo couldn't even put out his coping video before this became widely known. So initially, after Nintendo's financial report dropped and suddenly all of these narratives and conspiracies about the Switch 2 had been completely done and finished, the Switch 2 is doing very, very well. It's selling a ton of units, selling a ton of games. Everyone's bending over backwards trying to find something they can doom post about. And so what they eventually settled on was Metroid Prime 4 hasn't been brought up. Metroid Prime 4 hasn't been talked about. So that must mean the game has failed. That must mean the game is underperforming and that Nintendo's mad about it. And that we could potentially never get another Metroid again. This is peak hyperbolic bullshit, especially because it wasn't actually true. Nintendo released a statement afterwards saying that Metroid Prime 4 sold over 1 million units. We just didn't release that information in the financial report. And people were freaking out about it because the narrative initially was that Metroid Prime 4 sold under 1 million, and now people are seething that it only sold over about 1 million. It sold less than Kirby Air Riders. Never mind that Kirby's a much bigger IP, and Metroid Prime 4 is selling about as much as older Metroid Primes anyway. Actually, I would say it's well on its way to outperforming Metroid Prime 2 and 3 at the very least. And if it can beat Metroid Prime, the original, well, maybe not the original because of the remastered version, but if it could theoretically do another 500,000 units this year, Prime 4 is going to be a pretty solid Metroid Prime game sales-wise. And the simple fact of the matter is, and I've been saying this for a long time, people really had their expectations overblown for this. People really thought Metroid Prime was some killer app for the Switch, that it was some huge AAA game, that it was some huge seller for them. It isn't. It never has been, never will be. This has always been a niche thing for a niche audience. 1 million for Metroid Prime is actually perfectly reasonable. But that isn't what the online gaming community wanted to tell you, okay? They believe Metroid Prime 4 was going to be one of the biggest games on the console and this huge system seller. And the reality is, it probably was the least relevant Nintendo exclusive this year, other than maybe Hyrule Warriors. Okay, I would say that Hyrule Warriors maybe is more niche than Metroid Prime 4, but that's a spin-off. And the simple fact of the matter is, and this really needs to be said, is that the online Metroid fan base are posers. Okay, I think that can be pretty clearly said going by what we've been seeing over the past year with all the seething about the game, about the copes about it, about how the narrative about how nobody wants to see the Galactic Federation in these games, or how Metroid shouldn't have stories, or how there shouldn't be NPCs or exposition or anything. These games are about being completely alone. People are spouting talking points from the 80s. Okay, they're so utterly delusional about what Metroid actually is that they've created this weird fan fiction alternate reality version of it that doesn't actually exist. Everything that Prime 4 did made perfect sense when you take into consideration what Prime has been building up to since Prime 2, okay? Prime 1 was kind of a 3D basic Metroid game, very very Zelda-esque, very simplistic. By the way, that's another cope that these guys tried to come up with. Metroid is nothing like Zelda when they're actually very very similar. But Metroid Prime 2 introduced the Galactic Federation. They were a massive part of the plot, and it makes sense if you think about it, for Prime to have more of a focus on NPCs and the wider world of Metroid. 2D Metroid has been very very has taken a different approach, but Prime has always been about expanding the universe more, introducing more alien species, introducing more NPCs, having different planets. Prime 3 had you go from planet to planet. There's so much you can see from these games that really kind of demonstrate the direction the series was going in. The fact that this is the same team that put out Federation 4 should have been like a very strong indication that Nintendo wanted to do more with the Federation troopers. And simply sitting there and like acting as if like nobody cares about this, that nobody wants to see this, like it's just a giant cope, because plenty of people have become huge fans of Federation Force, myself included. I was very excited about Metroid Prime 4, and the game did reasonably meet my expectations in that regard. Now, obviously, I do think they have a lot of growing to do in this sense. I do think they really need to, like, make the Federation troopers more interesting and have them more involved with the plot. They definitely have a good template, and that's kind of how I look at Prime 4, is that it's kind of a template for what they're going to do in the future. But, like, the issue with this, like, the problem I have with this Metroid Prime, like, conspiracy talk is that, Metroid fans are just overly hyperbolic. Like, they genuinely are telling people right now that there's a very good chance that we're never, ever going to get another Metroid game because of this, when Nintendo has already released statements saying that they're planning Metroid Prime 5. Metroid Prime 4 is the beginning of a new chapter in the series. They've already committed to it. Right? So, like, the mindset that, like, that people have that, like, oh, yeah, this game was so badly received, we're never going to get another one. Like, that's not going to happen, okay? The game is polarizing. It isn't widely hated and despised, okay? And the people who are most critical of this game, like, very obviously didn't actually play it. You have, like, people like Stuttering Craig coming out and being like, I couldn't get past the jungle area. You have, like, Scott the Wise openly, like, saying on stream that he never got past, like, the first couple of hours. You have people like that, making all these wild statements about how this game disappointed them, even though I didn't play it. Again, it feels more as if among actual Metroid fans, people who actually play the games, Prime 4 was actually very well received. And that's, like, the weird issue that we're seeing here, is that for whatever reason, Metroid has this extremely hyperbolic fan base that will straight up, like, scream about how doomed the franchise is and how Nintendo wants it to fail, when in actuality, like, they don't even play the games. Like, this has been a phenomenon for years. Even when, like, Metroid Fusion and Prime came out, there was this, like, audience of people who were, like, doing this. Like, no, Metroid shouldn't be 3D. Metroid shouldn't be linear. Metroid shouldn't have a story, Like, even back then, that was true. And it is time that we really start, like, trying to push past this, okay? Because I've been sick of this for years. Okay, now that Metroid is, like, getting regular releases again, we're going back to the way things were in, like, the 2000s, where we're getting Metroid releases, a lot of them, and yet every single time, like, the audience just, like, freaks out over stupid things that don't really matter. Okay, with Prime 3, like, oh no, there are too many NPCs, oh, it's not a very good Prime game, like, when it was actually, like, a really, really solid game. Again, Prime 3, in a lot of ways, got a lot of the same criticisms that Prime 4 did, essentially. You have people who are upset that it's not enough like Halo, and then you have people who are, like, upset that it's, like, not enough like 2D Metroid, Like, let it be a Metroid Prime game. Like, let it be a spin-off. And that's my thing about this, is that, like, people have this mindset that, like, Metroid Prime is an evolution of Metroid, that it's, like, the big budget version of it, but, like, it really isn't. It is a spin-off series. Like, yeah, it's in the first person, but it very much is a spin-off franchise, from producers that, didn't really work on 2D Metroid. There's nothing wrong about it, but, like, people really need to have the right perspective when they go into these games, is that these are spin-offs, These are not, like, priority Metroid games for Nintendo. And that's, like, the other side of this, too, right? Like, my issue with this, like, the idea that Metroid is finished. Like, do you really think they're going to give up on the IP, like, after Metroid Dread became the most successful Metroid of all time? Like, do you really think that's going to happen? Like, if you do, you're delusional. And that is something that we really do have to address, like, going into this, is, like, the nonsense regarding this community desperately needs to be talked about more.